We've got more news to get to here. We're going to talk about Canada in a second because, well, here's a question. Will Canadians get to vote anytime soon about the future of their country? Or do they have to kowtow to these liberals who are seemingly running the show right now? So we now have Mark Carney, who is now the Prime Minister designate from Justin Trudeau, who basically handed over the keys to the kingdom there. When will Canadians get to pick or throw this guy out now? Is that going to happen? Or just more globalists taking over Canada and destroying that country and looking for a massive trade war with President Trump because that's how they think that they can get elected? We're going to talk about that in a second. Well, what the hell is happening in Canada? That's a phrase I've repeated over the past 2 years because I can't wrap my head around how the Liberals have destroyed that country. Talk to any Canadian. It's unrecognizable from what it was 15 years ago. Totally different country, unaffordable housing, disastrous border policy, flow of fentanyl and drugs into that country. It's unrecognizable. And it's all been done at the helm of globalist leaders in Canada. Well, it looks like they just got another one. Mark Carney. So who is Mark Carney? Let's understand who this guy is. How did Justin Trudeau just hand over the keys to this guy? And when will Canada actually get a right to vote and pick whether they want this guy in business or not? Or Pierre Poilievre, who is seemingly sounding more and more like a liberal every day with his positions on Ukraine, his positions against Trump and trade, the fentanyl crisis and everything else. So what is going on? So what is going on in Canada? Let's talk to David KRAYDEN, independent journalist, writes at the Post Millennial, joins us from Ottawa, Canada today, who's been watching all of this unfold with Mark Carney. And you called it, David, you called it. This is Mark Carney's going to be the guy. So here he is. So what is happening? Who is Mark Carney, and how are Canadians responding to this?
Well, Mark Carney, of course, is the former governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. He's also heavily invested in the WEF and the United Nations. He's a pure globalist. And you know what? He won the Liberal leadership vote on Sunday night with 86% support. That sounds like the old Soviet Union. That's what the Communist Party, well, they used to get 99% vote. But Carney got 86%. And the funny thing is, though, Clayton, 2/3 of the Liberal membership was disqualified prior to the voting. So they couldn't vote. They couldn't vote. And this irregularity was barely reported by the mainstream media. I reported it. Rebel News reported it.
Wait. Why couldn't they vote?
Talked about it.
Why couldn't they vote?
Disqualified from voting. And when asked why were they disqualified? Well, we'll get back to you on that. The Liberal Party has not explained why 2/3 of the membership could not vote in the leadership vote on Sunday night. It is absolutely outrageous. And do you think this guy has been installed as another globalist, as a successor to Justin Trudeau? Oh, you bet. He sits on the boards of 21 directorships. He claims they're mostly philanthropic, but have a look, and I've done a deep dive on this on my Substack page. Most of them are not. He was cited by the House Judiciary Committee last July 2024, as being part of a climate cartel because he's got this, and he was leading an NGO called the Glasgow Net Zero, and it's financial assistance for net zero. And the House Judiciary Committee said this is a climate cartel that has declared war on the American way of life. So that is Mark Carney. And he's also the former chairman of Brookfield Assets Management, which he just stepped down from prior to announcing his leadership race. But Brookfield, of course, is emblematic of the hypocrisy from the woke left in this country and around the world. It invests heavily in fossil fuels and pipelines around the world, except Canada, of course, and makes millions, hundreds of billions of dollars from these investments and pretends no big deal. And the funny thing is, before Mark Carney announced he was running for the Liberal leadership, he moved the headquarters of Brookfield Assets to New York. because he knew he was going to win this race and that his policies were going to hurt that company. So he moved it outside of Canada to the United States, where it will fare much better under Donald Trump.
So it'll do better. It'll be fine because, as President Trump wants to drill, baby drill, it'll take advantage of that. So brilliant strategy. And he can go on being a woke lefty globalist in Canada. So tonight, well, maybe you can clarify. Even someone in our chat room, Jeffrey Reinhardt's asking, he says, can Clayton clarify about the steel and tariffs? Are they coming at midnight? And is Trump charging Canada 25% or 50%? So I'm seeing 50% now on metals, right? So where are we sit with all of this right now on the trade side?
It's 25%. Trump was saying 50% if Ontario went through on its 25% surcharge on electricity. Now, the latest I heard just before I went on the air here is that apparently Donald Trump and Ontario Premier Doug Ford had a conversation this afternoon, and Doug Ford has backed down on this 25% surcharge. But Ford is out of his mind. He was actually threatening to cut off the electricity to a major part of the American Northeast, which, of course, is insanity. But he apparently is backed down today, which means we might not be in for the 50%. But this is changing so fast, Clayton. It's hard to keep a handle on what is happening with these tariffs. And as I've said repeatedly, we need to move beyond that. We need a new government in this country that's legitimate, that the Canadian people voted for, not one that is a caretaker government led by a caretaker prime minister who was elected by 150,000 Liberal Party members. That's what Canada has come to. And Carney is a sort of man that you would say, my God, he's got the personality of a reptile. And he is the worst public speaker I've ever heard. But he's got one thing over on Justin Trudeau. One thing up on Justin Trudeau is you can take him seriously. He does not come across as a manic pop star. And that's the only thing he's got in his favor. But people are asking, are we going to have an election anytime soon? Carney could conceivably stay on. He could stay on for a year and a half. But everything I'm hearing, including the Conservatives, are starting to put up signs already. I heard this morning. The Conservative Party of Canada is already distributing signs for candidates as of this morning. That indicates to me that there's probably going to be an earlier than expected election, or at least an earlier than is possible election. And I'll tell you why Carney might go here. He is so inept in terms of speaking to people, in terms of engaging with the public, and in terms of understanding what people actually use in their life. He once said that we don't use steel anymore.
But the large polluters pay. And so what happens...
But does that not ultimately trickle down?
No, because what the big companies are producing, by and large, are not products that we are consuming. There's some element of that, but by and large, a steel company, how much steel are you using these days, Todd? I mean, not as much we used to. So anyway, so that's how much steel are you using these days, Todd?
Now, this is the man with a PhD in economics. This is a man who supposedly governed the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. He doesn't seem to understand that steel is still a relevant commodity. And apparently he doesn't own a refrigerator, a stove, or a car. I don't understand, but he said this repeatedly. And the longer Carney stays around and keeps opening his mouth and saying stupid things like this, the better chance he has of reducing his popularity in the polls. Yeah. So I'm telling you, this man is dangerous. He's worse than Justin Trudeau. He is a full proponent of net zero. He wants a carbon tax to be levied on corporations. He says he's going to cancel the carbon tax. But as Pierre Poilievre has pointed out, cancel it on individuals, offset it on corporations, which of course will then immediately put it on consumers. And what he wants to do is, in addition, is to establish something that he really breaks down into a carbon tariff. And this is absolutely frightening. And this is one reason Donald Trump needs to stop attacking the conservative opposition and let an election occur in this country to get this guy out. Because it's almost like as soon as Trump got elected, the WEF said, hey, let's plant another one of our people in Ottawa to keep an eye on this guy, because Mark Carney is on the record as saying he wants to destroy the United States dollar in favor of the Chinese currency, or something he calls a synthetic hegemonic currency, whatever the heck that is. And he's also wants digital banking, and he wants to eradicate any other forms of free banking. And so this man is a clear and present danger to freedom, not only in Canada, but to Americans as well. He is going to be nothing but a problem.
I mean, it reminds me of Kamala Harris. It reminds me of what the Democrats did to install Kamala Harris without having to go through a primary, where people don't have to vote. We don't have to choose. We just, we're told, Democrats were just told, here's your candidate, it's Kamala Harris. You don't have to do any kind of primarying at all. We don't have to go back and vote for these people at all. I mean, it seems to me that's what's happening here. So can you give me best case scenario for an election in Canada, worst case scenario? Are we talking a year and a half worst case scenario for an election?
Mark Carney could conceivably hang on for a year and a half to October 2026, because the Canadian Constitution says a government has to have an election after 5 years. Now, there's legislation in effect that has governed the last 4 or 5 federal elections now in Canada that says an election should be held every 4 years. But the Constitution would certainly trump that legislation. So conceivably, he could hang on for quite a while. But as I've said, as Canadians discover what Brookfield Assets Management was up to, and the fact that Brookfield was paying about 5% corporate tax during the Trudeau years, and was sheltering billions of dollars in Bermuda during this time. The information about Carney is coming out in vast amounts on a daily basis. So he could have an election within the next 6 weeks. I predict as soon as he becomes prime minister, and he's negotiating on the timeline right now with Justin. They're having their little transition time right now. And Justin almost cried, by the way, on Sunday night again when he was saying adieu, farewell, amen.
We got you. I put Canadians first. I thought I was going to make it through this, but I'm not.
To the Canadian people. But Mark Carney will be prime minister within the next week. I predict he will have an earlier election than October 2026, because I think by that time, most Canadians will want to tar and feather him and have him leave town rather quickly. He is not somebody who wears well. He's somebody who wears out his welcome very quickly. And the more you see of Mark Carney, there is more to dislike. He is supercilious, arrogant, absolutely detached from the average person, because he hasn't lived with the average person for many, many years. His wife is independently wealthy as he is. They have been out of the country for much of the last 10 years, flying back and forth. He's a citizen of 3 countries, by the way, the UK, Ireland, and Canada. And Canada has always been sort of his third choice. But this is the man the globalists have appointed, have anointed, have coronated as their leader in Canada. And the sooner we can get him out, the better. I said the other day on my own show, let Mark Carney's tenure as prime minister be the shortest in Canadian history. We've had some very short tenures as prime minister. John Turner, Kim Campbell, people of recent vintage. Let Mark Carney be even shorter than that, because this man has come here on a mission, and it's a mission to fulfill a globalist agenda. And his whole life, from Harvard onwards, from all of his years in the WEF, all of his years as an international banker, all of his years with the United Nations, have geared him to take over Canada and the Canadian economy, and to be as much of a problem for his southern neighbor as he possibly can be. Beware, but there is hope. I believe Canadians can still choose to get rid of this guy before it's too late.
We'll see. We'll see if Canada can have an election or if they're stuck with this guy. Canada moving the way, becoming like Ukraine, and the Democrats in the United States. I hate to say it, but it seems to be the case. I hope that he maybe serves as short a tenure, maybe as like Liz Truss in the UK. Maybe 49 days. Let's see if we can pull that off in Canada. David Crayden, great to see you as always. Check David's great show as well. You can follow him on X as well as on YouTube, Crayden's Right. And thanks for all of your great coverage as always, David. Great to see you.
Always nice to be with you, Clayton, and welcome back from Florida.
Thank you so much. Good to be back. Good to be back here in the saddle.